Okay. All right. Frank?
Well, thank you, Kemp, and I appreciate the invitation to speak to James River Photo Club. It's a little bit, I have to admit, a bit intimidating. I appreciate Kemp's kind words for the presentation I gave a few weeks ago to another club, but it's a bit intimidating because generally speaking to some pretty good photographers. So the idea that I'm going to provide, or present some words of wisdom always seems a little unlikely, but we'll give it a shot. And please feel free to ask questions at any time. This is not a formal thing, and I hope that it becomes interactive at some point. So anyway, without further ado, well, I guess I'll give myself a bit of an introduction. I was an engineer for the bulk of my working life, but I've always been interested in photography, like a lot of folks my age. I took up photography when I started having kids. You want to record the life and times of your growing family. But I found, like so many did, that photography could be a fascinating endeavor in and of itself. So I started taking classes, as I'm sure many of you did. And I always thought that at some point when I had more time, I would give it more attention. And that time came when I retired. And upon retirement, and also looking for some activity that would keep my brain from turning completely to mush, I decided to go back to school, get another degree. I went back to the University of Colorado, and I got a fine arts degree with an emphasis on photography. So I was able to close the loop on my interest in photography, and what you're about to see is just sort of some thoughts that have evolved with that interest and devotion to photography in my post-retirement years. And again, I suspect there will be nothing that you haven't heard in one form or another before, but we'll go for it. And please ask questions as you may. If Kemp, if I can get access, is the shared screen going to work for me?
Yes.
So can you all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Got it.
I titled this The Photography of the Unspectacular. And the notion here is how I might go about taking interesting photographs of everyday things. I found for myself that as much as I enjoy looking at photographs of spectacular scenery, I grew up, if you will, in the 60s, and Ansel Adams and his fabulous landscape photography was the star of photography in that era, and so I sort of became weaned on the photography of Ansel Adams and Edward Weston and the lot. So I certainly appreciate spectacular imagery, but as I developed this continuing interest in photography, I tried to find out what it is that I really liked looking at, and what it turned out was it was not so much the thing that was being photographed. It was the way that photographs can capture shades and lines and shapes, forms, and that became the focus of my photography as I pursued it. And that aspect of photography could be captured without the need for spectacular imagery. So I often look for unspectacular things, everyday objects that can be conveyed to photography to capture interesting compositions that are based primarily on light and shading and form. And so that's what this presentation is all about. So let me go on then. As I said, I'm not sure there's anything I'm really going to be able to convey to you because I'm looking at the imagery that just presented just now. I can obviously tell that you all are very good photographers, and there's nothing probably likely that I want to be able to add to your repertoire of knowledge. But I do want to remind you that it's not what we all look at, it's what we see. And this phrase is not what you look at, it's what you see. Was caught in this cartoon I found in the papers some time ago, and it tickled me. So I included its relationship to photography is problematical, but it gets the point across. So as photographers, I like to think it's not so much what we look at, it's what we see. And as photographers, we have the ability, I believe, to see what most people, not photographers, don't see. We have the potential to see artful compositions of universal design elements. I'll allude to those again a little bit later. And the chance to use photography not to create a document of what's in front of us, but art. As I said earlier, I believe there's a charm in everyday subjects. I heard reference just now of voyages to exotic places and scenery that is rare, and obviously imaging that kind of scenery is fantastic, and I love to see it myself. But it does obviously not available to everybody, or certainly at all times. But everyday subjects are readily accessible; they're all around us. There's no need to travel to exotic locations to find them. And we as photographers, using our vision to see, not just look, can transform these everyday things into compelling images, I believe. So that sort of poses the question, what makes a photograph compelling? And I mean, there's doctors, keep going into this topic endlessly. And I've put down here two basic elements. Again, one could argue there are many more, but in the main, I like to think it sort of simplifies my thinking that what makes a photograph compelling are two components. The first, beautiful light and composition. Light is obviously the most essential element to an art form that is named after light's ability to draw, photography. And composition is the element that can transform a document into an art piece. And in that we share composition, the ability to compose with all the other visual artists, the painters and drawers and so forth. All visual artists deal with composition as we as photographer artists do as well. The other element I think that makes photography compelling is the connection to the human experience. And I'll address each of these components in part, starting off with light and composition, and we'll get to the human experience part later. All right, so again, nothing that you haven't heard probably a zillion times before. The elements of design, especially photographic design, light at the top of the list, of course, but color, line and shape, the ability to capture texture, value, form, that is the notion of capturing 3D in a 2D format, and space, the space between all these other elements. Composition then is the art of arranging the scene, either a found scene or a created scene, such that these elements that previously discussed are brought into play in a fashion that we humans just naturally are compelled to give some attention to. The elements of photographic composition in particular involve lighting, exposure, shape and proportion, positioning, orientation, balance, harmony, framing and cropping, leading lines, negative space, contrast, arrangements of the elements. You've all heard of the golden mean and the rule of thirds, I'm sure. The notion of looking for scenes or arranging scenes that have rhythm and repetition and pattern, the use of perspective, compression. The cameras in particular is a great, fantastic ability to compress 3 dimensions into 2. And of course, perhaps the most powerful composition tool of all is breaking all those rules when the scene in front of you just demands that you do something different to really create a compelling image. So yeah, composition with leading lines, repetition. This may be an overkill in that regard, but obviously this is a kind of image that has those rules of composition in mind and takes advantage of the scene that I think just naturally will compel someone to look at it, spend some time with it. By the way, this is a scene at some small monastery somewhere in Germany. I was fortunate to see it one time. So the photographer's eye, seeing what most do not. Again, I think this is what we all share as photographers, is the seeing the elements of design and composition in ordinary subject, in addition to the spectacular scenes that sort of self-compose in front of us. We as photographers can arrange ourselves, where we place ourselves, where we place the camera, which focal length we use, what we crop and what we don't crop, and so forth. We can see how if we can utilize the tools that we have in front of us to compose a scene. And the special gift that we have as photographers is to see how your camera sees. All humans share a vision, but we as photographers can also think in terms of how our camera is going to take in the scene that is in front of us, how it's going to handle light and tonality, how it's going to handle color, how we may use framing and cropping, how we may use focus, the depth of field, how we can compress time or capture time. Again, something that the casual dog photographer can't think of those terms. They just don't think of it that way. We as photographic artists can utilize these things. And at the bottom of the list, but high on one that I count on very often, is the ability to compress 3 dimensions into 2. Here's a scene. For those of you who have had an opportunity to come into Richmond, you may have had the opportunity to go into Old City Hall, which I think has been closed for renovation. But Old City Hall, at least the foyer of Old City Hall, is this fantastic architecture in the building. And if you look up, you see all these corners and cornices. And one day I was in there and I realized that with the right focal length and the right angle, I could take all these different angles that were there looking up and compress them, keeping them all in focus, and just create an image that befuddles most people, which is part of what I try to do, because as I'll address it in a bit later, I think that adding a bit of mystery is part of the enjoyment of looking at a photograph like this. I alluded to earlier about about seeing how a camera sees, and that also includes how a camera is going to capture light. One day I was doing a series of images of the undersides of of roads. I called it underpass. I called the series underpass. It was actually done for my thesis work. And I came upon this scene above me. Actually, it turns out if you straighten yourself and look up, you can see where the light is coming through. Above is actually a freeway. This is an underpass. And it was meant to be traversed by humans. That actually leads to a light rail station. Anyway, I'm in this concrete cave, partially lit from the outside, but I realized there was also some artificial lighting. And I had experience. I had some experience with looking at that light fixture, and I realized that was probably a mercury vapor light, a lamp that was lighting the scene. And I know from past experience that cameras will capture what is essentially a green light. Now, because we humans come with built-in white balance, as you well know. Most people walking in this area don't see green at all. They just see some shade of gray because, as again, you're well aware, our brain does white balancing. If it expects to see something in a color, it sort of puts that color there, whether physically or that color is there or not. And that would be the case here. But I knew my camera, for all its sophistication, would more likely capture the light from that mercury vapor lamp in a way that's actually consistent with the physics of the situation, and would create potentially an interesting composition, and that is this composition. So the portion you see in green was not done artificially. It was done because that part of this concrete area was lit by mercury vapor lamp, and the area that looks more like the gray concrete you would expect is actually lit by sunlight coming through a gap there. So, as I alluded to earlier, I have come to really like to capture. I capture, like all of us, anything that I find interesting in front of me. If I happen to be in a place where I see a lovely landscape, I'll certainly try and take a landscape. Or if I see a lovely bird or some other wildlife, I try and capture that as well. But it's the thing that I'm drawn to as a photographer are what I call architectural abstractions. And I use the term architecture very loosely, and by that I primarily mean everyday, mostly man-made things. Chairs, walls, stairs, windows, buildings, and so forth. Anything that has the potential of being composed of interesting design elements and provides composition opportunities. Likewise, I use the term abstraction very generally, and by that I mean at least a rendering of the thing such that the identity is less important than the composition of its design elements. So if I take a photograph of a wall or a chair or other everyday thing, it's not so much the chair or the wall or whatever might be under my feet. It's the opportunity to create a composition that includes that, but is primarily about a composition of design elements. And admittedly, architectural abstractions are often, not always, but often accomplished with very tight shots. So how I approach architectural abstractions, again, I look for everyday things with interesting repeating patterns and shapes and colors. You see before you an image that I took at Hollywood Cemetery here in Richmond. The repeating pattern is obvious. There's these three crosses, but what my eye saw was, in addition to the three crosses, I could see how a composition that actually called upon the repeating pattern of the space between the crosses, the so-called negative space, would actually be key to this composition. So it was just not just a photograph where three crosses happen to be in the image, but I tried to arrange it so that the negative space itself was a key compositional tool that I would use to make this image. And I also employed the tools of depth of field, where I focus in particular on the center cross, and let the other two crosses go soft, so that your eyes are naturally compelled to that center cross, while at the same time, whether a casual viewer knows it or not, seeing the negative space as the element that holds the piece together. As I mentioned earlier, generally for these architectural abstractions, generally, not always, but generally means getting closer. So why? So that to emphasize the composition, again, the composition of the design elements, the composition formed of shapes, colors, and lines, and so that the viewer will focus on the composition rather than the thing. I mean, obviously, this, if you look at what am I looking at here, you'll eventually conclude, if not immediately, it's just little drinking fountains. But at least I hope that people will mostly appreciate the arcs of light, the shading between dark and bright, and so forth, as the primary purpose and point of this image, not so much the fact that I've created a document of drinking fountains. And get closer one way or another. If I can't do it with my feet, if I can't do it with the appropriate telephoto lens, then I'll get closer in post-processing. The smaller image to the left is an image I took from Richmond City Hall, looking down on the surrounding buildings, surrounded by, in this case, the Omni Hotel and buildings next to it. And as I stood up there, lamenting the fact that I didn't have a powerful enough lens to capture what I thought would be a very interesting image with all those design elements. Look at all the design elements are there, but I couldn't get close enough. So in post-processing, it's something you can do in post. And so the image you see on the right obviously is derived from the original image, and is what I would have captured if I could have gotten closer or had a powerful enough lens. But I got closer one way or another. Another tool I use is to restrict the context of the image, and that is to remove, by framing or perspective, the parts of the scene that provide too much context. It gives too much information that if included in the final image tends to make the image less about composition and more about documentation. And so I try to restrict the context. Here is an image of two beautiful shiny Corvettes that were parked side by side. They weren't actually touching, but by arranging myself and the angle of the lens, I could put the red car and the bright shiny red car and the bright shiny yellow car next, and compose the shot where the reflections of the bodies on each created, in my mind, an interesting composition of color and lines, shape. And of course, the use of imagination. This is the notion of using different camera perspectives and angles as an important and sometimes the most important aspect in terms of converting everyday scenes into potential artful scenes. What you're looking at here is a stairwell in some ordinary commercial building I happened to be in, and I noted that the window light to the outside, as you probably know, daylight actually has a lot of blue in it, and I thought my camera would capture that blue that blue light reflecting off just regular dull concrete steps. And by arranging myself and arranging the camera at this angle, I created the scene that again is more about repetition and form and shape. Again, the enjoinder here is that what I'm talking about is art making, not documentation. I'm not trying to document a stairwell. I'm trying to utilize everyday scenes and conform and arrange them to create something artful. For what it's worth, I call this up the down staircase. So if you haven't tried your hand at this sort of photography, I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, obviously it's like anything else. You experiment, don't be afraid of mistakes, make lots of mistakes. It's how we learn, it's how we stretch our imagination. And I'll be the first to admit that most shots won't work. When I go out on a photo shoot, it may take a few hundred photographs, but if I find one good photograph, I call that photo session a success. It's a lot of trial and error, a lot of what you think might work, and it turns out it doesn't. But just as often as I think you may have all found out, there's the timing where you took the shot that you didn't think would work. And well, when you finally bring it up on your computer or make a print of it and say, yeah, that really did work. One of the things that maybe I didn't need to get a degree to find this out, but it's certainly something that became clear in going through the process, that a significant aspect of the art of photography is the art of curating the shots. It's a matter of going through all these images and identifying the one or the few that really work. Remember, oh gosh, I'm gonna show my age here and blank out. One of the famous street photographers, whose name I should have, but bear with me, showing my age, said that he took photographs to see what something would look like photographed. And by that he meant sometimes he didn't know. He took a lot of photographs as a street photographer, and sometimes he would think, most of the time he would think he was capturing an image, and then realize as he curated the shots that he hadn't, but he would find the one or two that were really good. So getting back to the notion of what makes a photograph compelling, talked a lot about composition, probably bored you to death in the process. Let me talk about this notion of connection to the human experience. And what I'm alluding to here is this. As you probably know, maybe because certainly we're in a time frame where everybody, photographers and non-photographers, are just inundated with imagery. Most people don't spend a lot of time with photographs or any visual art, quite honestly, but certainly photographs, because the photography is the visual imagery they see the most often. And what does it take then to actually cause someone to spend a little bit more time with an image, especially one that's intended by us as to be an artful image? And I've come around to the notion that it's the notion that the image has something in it for them beyond just being physical, just being composed beautifully. And that is it gives them something that they can relate to. They may not relate to it in the way that you thought of it when you captured the image, but that's neither here nor there. The important point is to give them something so that they can engage with it beyond the pleasure that it might give their eyes. And that means capturing in one way or another an image that either relates to joy, tragedy, human nostalgia, awe, beauty, mystery, any number of things that are the sort of the the stuff that makes humans human, that the stuff that we all share, regardless of our culture, where we live, whatever, because we all share these experiences one way or another. You look at here, there's a composition of famous photographs that you've all seen. You can see, I believe you can see they all sort of touch one way or another on these basic themes. And well, how do you connect architectural abstraction with the human experience? Well, what I try to do, and I don't always succeed, probably fail probably more often than not, but what in the back of my mind I'm trying to do is provide a sense of mystery, just a little mystery. I try to capture their eyes with the composition and then offer them a mystery as to what is it I'm looking at? And in that way, engage the mind. And if that causes someone to spend a couple of more seconds with my image, I feel I've won. That's all I ask. I don't expect them to, just stand there in front of, my image for an hour. I remember reading somewhere that there's this place somewhere, a chapel somewhere in Texas, I believe, where they have this array of Mark Rothko paintings. It's basically wall-to-wall Mark Rothko paintings. And people go in there and they sit down and they're almost in this, elevated state as they're sitting in awe of these huge paintings by Rothko. I assume you're familiar with that painter from the abstract expressionist era and his color field work. Well, I don't have that kind of high hopes, but if someone will spend a few extra seconds with one of my images, then I think that I've won. And so I look for compositions and hope to engage them that way. Here's an image. Whether you engage with it or not, I don't know. But I came upon this wall and had this interesting gradation of colors and this shape swirling through it. And I included a nail sticking out of the wall just to provide a clue to the viewer that this wasn't a painting, that this actually was just a wall. Here's another image. That is the kind of thing that I like to look for. This was taken in a mall. I'm looking up at the what do you call it? Sun windows? No, what's the word? Overhead openings into the sky.
Skylight.
Skylight. Yes, thank you. My brain's not working. I went out and played golf today in the heat and humidity. I am fried. I got to tell you. And so this mall has, you look up and the trusses are all wood trusses, and then looks out to the skylights. And then in front of, as you look down the mall, there are these plexiglass sheets there. I don't know if you can see my pointer here or not, but there's one plexiglass sheet here and one that starts there. And so you're looking through these plexiglass sheets into the trusses, into the skylights, and off the plexiglass are reflections of the truss beams and reflections from hanging lights and so forth. So there's this, this mass of lines and shapes and colors. To me, to my eye, it was kind of interesting. And I hope that people look at it and say, what in God's name is going on here? And if they do, and spend a few seconds with it, then again, I feel like I've accomplished what I hope to accomplish. I'm going to shift gears here and hope to be able to relate it to what I said earlier. I want to talk to you about the charm of a photo project, but again, I know I'm speaking to polished photographers, so again, maybe preaching to the choir. The charm of a photo project is to start off by picking a subject or a theme, as much as I've seen, for example, that you've announced the theme for the next month's meeting. And it's the theme that binds the compositions of the images within the portfolio. with a goal of creating a mini portfolio. It might be 3 images, might be 6, might be a dozen, whatever. That's your call. But the notion is that you have this theme that's going to tie the images together, and you know, the value of the project to the photographer, motivation to get out and to look and to see as a photographer and photograph, and seeing more of what you're looking for. I'm going to use this as an example. I think it's one that everyone can relate to. A year ago, my wife went looking she needed a new car, and she started looking at making a model that I had never paid. I didn't even know it existed. But that's what she wanted. And eventually she was able to purchase it. Well, once the car was in the garage, and I could see it and knew its shape, I started seeing that car all around town. And what I'm getting at here is that when you pick a theme and you get out there and you're looking for it, you'll see it, and you'll see it more often. And as you create a body of work, working around that theme, you'll see more of it, and more ways that you can image it in ways that are interesting. And obviously, a project is an opportunity to create lasting, tangible art, either in prints or a photo book or a slideshow or some other artifact that gives light to your art. So I'm going to close with a theme that I created. Actually, it was taken during my time on campus. I get alluded to going back and getting a fine arts degree. And I found myself, sitting at the, coffee shop one morning waiting for class. And I was sitting there, it was early morning, and light was coming in through a window. And I noticed how light bounced off a couple of chairs and a table. And like most photographers, I carried a small camera with me, pulled out the camera out of my backpack and started taking images. And didn't think much of it. Wandered around the campus and came upon another scene that involved seats or chairs or anything you could sit on. And before you know it, I started imaging these things, and it was sort of spontaneous and became sort of and I realized I was creating a small portfolio built around things you sit on. So I called this portfolio Seat Assignment. I'll just go through these quickly. Again, nothing special here. These are not extraordinary, spectacular scenes, but I hope to convey that the notion that what is really being shown here are compositions that have that create interest through repetition and all those compositional tools that we had alluded to earlier. I wonder whether you can see the seat in this image. It's actually that black thing that you see on the right is actually a bench embedded in the wall. The white area is actually a wall forward. The red wall to the right is actually back behind the white wall, and there's a cloth covered bench that then sits in that recessed area. And the seating area of the bench is starting to fray, and that was the clue that provided in this photograph that there actually is a real thing there. I call this fraying Rothko because Rothko, again, the abstract expressionist painter of the 50s, used color field as his theme for his artwork. This was taken at day's end, once on campus building. My eyes were captured by the arrangement of rectangular and angular lines and shadows and so forth. Call this one shady characters. Again, it's not the chairs per se, it's just the capturing the curves, the repetition of curves, and so forth. Obviously, repetition here. George Orwell's 1984 comes to mind when I saw this scene. Don't tell me why. Stab in the dark. This is some mid-century chair design. But again, it's really about the shapes, the repetition of the shaded circular arc to the shape of the table and the bend of the chair and the play of light and shadow. And finally, alter ego. Anyway, in summary, the everyday objects offer plenty and readily accessible subjects for a beautiful photograph. But again, I caution, don't take photograph of things, take photograph of compositions. And I like to think that abstract photography has the potential of offering a bit of mystery to enhance the chances of connecting to the viewer. And I'll close with this final thought. As with any advice about art making you receive, incorporate into your photography anything that makes sense to you, anything that resonates with you, and ignore the rest. Because in the end, you want to create your art, not somebody else's. And so with that, I conclude.
Thank you, Frank. The part about your presentation on perspectives gives me some inspiration for our August theme, which is on perspective. We had a question that about the image on the underpass. Do you remember what the white balance was set at in your camera?
Yeah, I usually leave it on auto, as most people do, because generally speaking, you want that white balance and count on it most often. But I knew that because I could go back to the raw image, where now it's up to me to deal with all of that. I knew that camera had captured the green light because again, I understood just from the physics of it, that was a mercury vapor lamp up there, and I knew that it was actually the frequency of the light that it was emitting would be captured as green. And if any of you have ever shot in the film days, you may have seen the green cast that such lamps will provide, almost impossible to get rid of. So yeah, the camera was in auto balance mode, but because I suspect, like most of you, I go back to the raw files, I knew I could get that green light out of there, and that's what I wanted, because that's again going back to the photographer's eyes and seeing, not just looking. I knew that was the scene. That was what I wanted out of that scene. That's what I had to pre-visualize, if you will. And it was there. It was just a matter of dealing with the raw file appropriately and bringing that out.
Any other questions of Frank?
Sure, Philip.
Yeah. Does your previous background influence your photography? I mean, I'm an engineer by training, and I see the same sorts of things that you're looking at and say, yeah, those make cool photographs. So I'm wondering if your previous training has
I think it
influenced your-
does. I think it does, Philip. Because in particular, things that are repetition and order. I don't know. My mind goes there, and I
Yep.
suspect that's part of it. And as I said, not everything works. In fact, the great bulk of the imagery I bring back after a photo shoot, what in the world was I thinking of when I shot that? But yeah, I do tend to that sort of thing. And I think that engineering background has something to do with it for sure.
Yeah, I always go back. Some of the architectural students at the school I went to came in one day, and one of their teachers had piled a bunch of chairs in the center of the room, and they said it's a drawing exercise, and this everybody gets their stuff out. And the professor said, "I want you to draw the empty spaces that you see." And I've always remembered that as now that I'm into photography, that's something to remember.
Yeah.
Don't always shoot the obvious.
Yeah, the negative space is going to be very important, that's for sure.
Oh
Yeah.
God, yes.
Yeah.
Gregory, you had a question.
Yeah. So that project with the chairs that you did you take more than one shot, or did you go back and possibly re-photograph that composition with a different light? I bring that
Yeah,
up.
I mean, as it turned out, circumstances would offer me lots of opportunity. I mean, because I was just wandering around campus, and I'd be at a coffee shop, or I'd be in a library, or whatever, and over and over again throughout the course of the years that I was on campus. So I would not necessarily revisit for the sake of reshooting the same scene, primarily because the same scene was rarely ever there again. I don't tend to arrange anything. I don't, those arrangement of chairs that you saw, they were there. I just saw them, and the next time I would go back into that building, the coffee shop or whatever, nothing was ever there the same way. And even if it was, the lighting was never the same. So what you saw were the images I took at the time, but don't think that I just took the one image there. I mean, I probably took, for every image you saw, I probably took 10 more, wandered around looking. And I will say, I've said this to photo groups as well, not that it needs saying anymore there, because everyone's shooting with cell phones, but it doesn't have to be exotic gear. This was the camera I used. This is what was in my backpack during those days. And I don't know what this thing is. It's a little Canon. I think it's 2 megabytes or something. And it's got this little. That was the screen. So it doesn't have to be exotic gear by any means. The important thing. What do they say? The best camera is the one you have with you. This is what I had. Yeah, I mean, every once in a while I try and revisit a scene, but there were rarely ever, students were always moving stuff around, and lighting was always changed and so forth. But and I took, again, I'm not going to try and say, I just saw this one image I took it. I probably took, for every one you saw, I took 10 or 20 moving around, trying different things, and then just kept the one that I say the curated the shot down to the one that I thought was most interesting.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes. Have you ever been tempted to shoot film?
Film? You mean analog?
Yes. Yes. Real live, honest to God, silver
I started off
on.
photography in when I started having kids in the 70s, and it was all film then. And I will, and so I shot film for years. I had dark room and so forth, and I will tell an interesting story just because you touched on the subject. when I started that fine art degree program at the University of Colorado, they start you off with a basic film class. You're required to have a fully manual, analog camera with a, you can put different lenses on it. That's standard equipment. Well, so all these young kids are right around me in this class. All have to rush out and talk to grandma or grandpa and say, hey, do you have a film camera? And so they all grab grandpa's old film camera back in the closet, and they went out shooting the first assignment. Of course, all I had to do was into my closet, dust off my own Nikon, and I was ready to go. Well, the difference was, at least for that first assignment, was I knew how to use that camera. These kids came back from the first assignment. It only lasted once because they were smart kids. But you can imagine what happened. Well, there was the one who opened up the back. Before he rewinded, there was the one who assumed it was all autofocus, and so had a film full of blurred images. And it went on and on like that. They were so used to modern cameras and expecting the camera this would do the same thing, that it was kind of funny. This old man, this old gray beard man had the only images that actually came out. And it only lasted one assignment. They were smart kids, and all of them turned into really, really fine photographers. But for that first assignment, the old man had the advantage. Had his own camera and knew how to use it.
That's a great story.
I like that one.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's really great meeting you all, and I really enjoyed looking at your imagery. And I know I'm talking to folks probably heard this stuff a zillion times before, so I appreciate your patience. And again, it was great being part of it tonight. Thank you, Kemp, and thank you all for
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. It was great inspiration for our photography.
And proof that engineers can be artistic if pushed to the limits.
Hold on to that. Amen. All right, good night, folks.
Thank
you.
Thank you. That was good.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to stop this recording. Yeah, I'm trying to stop button. There you go.